Chapter 4, Part 1 of The Voyage of the Beagle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Leon Meyer. The Voyage of the Beagle. Chapter 4, Part 1. Rio Negro to Bahia Blanca. Rio Negro. Estancias attacked by the Indians. Salt lakes, flamingos, Rio Negro to Rio Colorado, sacred tree, Patagonian hare, Indian families, General Rosas, proceed to Bahia Blanca, sand dunes, Negro lieutenant, Bahia Blanca, saline incrustations, Punta Alta, Zorio. July 24th, 1833. The Beagle sailed from Maldonado, and on August the 3rd she arrived off the mouth of the Rio Negro. This is the principal river on the whole line of coast between the Strait of Magellan and the Plata. It enters the sea about 300 miles south of the estuary of the Plata. About 50 years ago, under the old Spanish government, a small colony was established here, and it is still the most southern position (latitude 41 degrees) on this eastern coast of America inhabited by civilized man. The country near the mouth of the river is wretched in the extreme. On the south side a long line of perpendicular cliffs commences, which exposes a section of the geological nature of the country. The strata are of sandstone, and one layer was remarkable from being composed of a firmly cemented conglomerate of pumice pebbles, which must have travelled more than 400 miles from the Andes. The surface is everywhere covered up by a thick bed of gravel, which extends far and wide over the open plain. Water is extremely scarce, and, where found, is almost invariably brackish. The vegetation is scanty, and although there are bushes of many kinds, all are armed with formidable thorns, which seem to warn the stranger not to enter on these inhospitable regions. The settlement is situated 18 miles up the river. The road follows the foot of the sloping cliff, which forms the northern boundary of the great valley, in which the Rio Negro flows. On the way we pass the ruins of some fine estancias, which a few years since had been destroyed by the Indians. They withstood several attacks. A man present at one gave me a very lively description of what took place. The inhabitants had sufficient notice to drive all the cattle and horses into the corral which surrounded the house, and likewise to mount some small cannon. [Footnote: The corral is an enclosure made of tall and strong stakes. Every estancia, or farming estate, has one attached to it. End footnote. The Indians were Araucanians from the south of Chile, several hundreds in number, and highly disciplined. They first appeared in two bodies on a neighboring hill. Having there dismounted, and taken off their fur mantles, they advanced naked to the charge. The only weapon of an Indian is a very long bamboo or chuzo, ornamented with ostrich feathers and pointed by a sharp spearhead. My informer seemed to remember with the greatest horror the quivering of these chuzos as they approached near. When close, the cacique Pinchera hailed the besieged to give up their arms, or he would cut all their throats. As this would probably have been the result of their entrance under any circumstances, the answer was given by a volley of musketry. The Indians, with great steadiness, came to the very fence of the corral, but to their surprise they found the posts fastened together by iron nails instead of leather thongs, and of course in vain attempted to cut them with their knives. This saved the lives of the Christians. Many of the wounded Indians were carried away by their companions, and at last, one of the under caciques being wounded, the bugle sounded a retreat. They retired to their horses, and seemed to hold a council of war. This was an awful pause for the Spaniards, as all their ammunition, with the exception of a few cartridges, was expended. In an instant the Indians mounted their horses, and galloped out of sight. Another attack was still more quickly repulsed. A cool Frenchman managed the gun. He stopped till the Indians approached close, and then raked their line with grape shot. He thus laid 39 of them on the ground, and of course such a blow immediately routed the whole party. The town is indifferently called El Carmen or Patagones. It is built on the face of a cliff which fronts the river, and many of the houses are excavated even in the sandstone. The river is about 200 or 300 yards wide, and is deep and rapid. The many islands with their willow trees, and the flat headlands, seen one behind the other on the northern boundary of the broad green valley, form, by the aid of a bright sun, a view almost picturesque. The number of inhabitants does not exceed a few hundreds. These Spanish colonies do not, like our British ones, carry within themselves the elements of growth. Many Indians of pure blood reside here. The tribe of the Cacique Lucani constantly have their toldos on the outskirts of the town. [Footnote: The hovels of the Indians are thus called.] The local government partly supplies them with provisions, by giving them all the old worn out horses, and they earn a little by making horse rugs and other articles of riding gear. These Indians are considered civilized, but what their character may have gained by a lesser degree of ferocity is almost counterbalanced by their entire immorality. Some of the younger men are, however, improving. They are willing to labor, and a short time since a party went on a sealing voyage, and behaved very well. They were now enjoying the fruits of their labor, by being dressed in very gay, clean clothes, and by being very idle. The taste they showed in their dress was admirable. If you could have turned one of these young Indians into a statue of bronze, his drapery would have been perfectly graceful. One day I rode to a large salt lake, or salina, which is distant 15 miles from the town. During the winter it consists of a shallow lake of brine, which in summer is converted into a field of snow-white salt. The layer near the margin is from 4 to 5 inches thick, but towards the center its thickness increases. This lake was 2½ miles long and 1 broad. Others occur in the neighborhood many times larger, and with the floor of salt 2 and 3 feet in thickness, even when under water during the winter. One of these brilliantly white and level expanses, in the midst of the brown and desolate plain, offers an extraordinary spectacle. A large quantity of salt is annually drawn from the salina, and great piles, some 100 tons in weight, were lying ready for exportation. The season for working the salinas forms the harvest of Patagones, for on it the prosperity of the place depends. Nearly the whole population encamps on the bank of the river, and the people are employed in drawing out the salt in bullock wagons. This salt is crystallized in great cubes, and is remarkably pure. Mr. Trenham Reeks has kindly analyzed some for me, and he finds in it only 0.26 of gypsum and 0.22 of earthy matter. It is a singular fact that it does not serve so well for preserving meat as sea salt from the Cape de Verde Islands, and a merchant at Buenos Aires told me that he considered it as 50% less valuable. Hence the Cape de Verde salt is constantly imported, and is mixed with that from these salinas. The purity of the Patagonian salt, or absence from it of those other saline bodies found in all sea water, is the only assignable cause for this inferiority; a conclusion which no one, I think, would have suspected, but which is supported by the fact, lately ascertained, that those salts answer best for preserving cheese, which contain most of the deliquescent chlorides. The border of this lake is formed of mud, and in this numerous large crystals of gypsum, some of which are 3 inches long, lie embedded, whilst on the surface others of sulphate of soda lie scattered about. The Gauchos call the former the Padre del Sal, and the latter the Madre. They state that these progenitive salts always occur on the borders of the salinas, when the water begins to evaporate. The mud is black and has a fetid odor. I could not at first imagine the cause of this, but I afterwards perceived that the froth which the wind drifted on shore was colored green, as if by confervae. I attempted to carry home some of this green matter, but from an accident failed. Parts of the lake seen from a short distance appeared of a reddish color, and this perhaps was owing to some infusorial animalcula. The mud, in many places, was thrown up by numbers of some kind of worm, or annelidous animal. How surprising it is that any creature should be able to exist in brine, and that they should be crawling along crystals of sulphate of soda and lime! And what becomes of these worms when, during the long summer, the surface is hardened into a solid layer of salt? Flamingos in considerable numbers inhabit this lake, and breed here, throughout Patagonia, in northern Chile, and at